France was once seen as the heartbeat of Europe, a country of elegance, prosperity, and power. But beneath the postcard image, something has started to crack. Today, France is walking a fine line between stability and collapse. In just a few years, the government has burned through 5 prime ministers. The political walls are crumbling faster than they can be rebuilt. President Emmanuel Macron's approval ratings have collapsed, and his government barely survived a no-confidence vote. The country is split between reforms it desperately needs and protests that threaten to tear it apart. Meanwhile, France's borrowing has exploded past $4 trillion, a figure larger than its entire economy. Every second, another 5,000 euros is added to its national debt. The cost of living is climbing, wages are flat, and the streets of Paris are filled with strikes and frustration. For the first time, the idea that France might actually be in trouble is no longer just a headline. It is real. Economists, investors, and citizens can all see the signs. The second largest economy in Europe is quietly drifting into dangerous territory. The real question is simple. How did the country that once built Europe's strongest welfare system end up here, drowning in debt and division? The answer lies in a pattern that started half a century ago, and it has never stopped. For more than 50 years, France has spent more than it earns. Since 1974, not a single government has ended the year with money left over. Each new leader has promised to fix it, yet every solution ends the same way. Another short burst of optimism followed by more debt. At first it all seemed to work. France built one of the most generous welfare systems in the world. Free healthcare, free education from nursery to university, and pensions that guaranteed security in old age. It was a model admired across the globe, proof that a modern country could blend capitalism with compassion. But there was a cost. Year after year, those promises demanded more money than the government collected in taxes. So they borrowed. And when that borrowing did not cause immediate pain, it became a habit that shaped the national identity. People came to expect the state to step in for everything, from a hospital bill to unemployment checks to a comfortable retirement. It was more than policy. It was part of being French. For decades, the economy was strong enough to carry the weight. Growth was solid, jobs were stable, and millions paid into the system. But slowly, the math began to shift. The workforce got older, and fewer young people were replacing them. Taxes stayed high, yet the costs of welfare climbed even higher. The numbers no longer balanced, but no one wanted to be the politician who said the party was over. And so, France kept spending, confident that tomorrow would somehow pay for today. But tomorrow never came. The bills only grew larger, and the gap between what France promised and what it could afford kept widening. The warning signs were flashing, but the real crisis would begin when the country's biggest source of pride, the pension system, started to crumble from within. In the 1990s, France had 5 workers for every retiree. That balance kept the system afloat. But fast forward to today, and there are barely 3. By 2050, nearly 1 in 3 French citizens will be retired. That shift alone is enough to break the entire system. People are living longer too, about 11 years longer than they did 50 years ago. More years of life mean more years of pension checks, healthcare bills, and government support. The structure built in the past was never designed to carry this much weight for this long. France's pension system runs on what economists call pay as you go. The money that workers contribute today is immediately used to pay the pensions of current retirees. It only works when there are enough workers paying into the system, but when that balance flips, the system starts eating itself. To make matters worse, productivity among workers has slowed sharply. Many young people stay in school longer, earning degrees for jobs that do not require them. Nearly a quarter of graduates end up in positions that underuse their education. More study, less output. Fewer taxes coming in, more payments going out. It is a vicious cycle. Fewer taxpayers supporting more retirees, and each worker generating less wealth than before. Everyone in France knows it cannot go on like this, but the problem is bigger than math. It is emotional. Every attempt to change the system feels like breaking a sacred promise between the state and its people. And that emotional bond is exactly why every attempt at reform has led to chaos. But instead of facing the storm, leaders found another way to keep the illusion alive. They borrowed more. When the euro was introduced, it changed everything for France. Borrowing suddenly became easy and cheap. Interest rates dropped to historic lows, and the pressure to reform disappeared. Why risk protests and political chaos when you could simply borrow your way out of trouble? For a while, it looked like a perfect plan. Debt felt painless, and the country kept its generous welfare programs running without consequence. The numbers on paper looked stable enough, but the foundations were quietly eroding. Then came the global financial crisis of 2008. France poured billions into saving businesses and protecting jobs. The welfare system that once felt secure was now the lifeline keeping families afloat. In just 2 years, the national debt jumped from 60% of GDP to 80%. It was a warning sign, but one that politicians ignored. While countries like Greece and Spain were forced into strict bailouts, France avoided the spotlight. There was no pressure to change course. Instead, the European Central Bank cut interest rates again, making borrowing even cheaper. France doubled down, choosing debt over reform. But the world changed again in 2020. When the pandemic froze the economy, France had to step in once more, this time with hundreds of billions in relief funds, state guarantees, and emergency support. By the end, its debt had passed 110% of GDP, higher than the value of the entire economy. That was the breaking point. The illusion was gone. The welfare state that once symbolized pride had become too expensive to sustain. What had started as temporary borrowing turned into permanent dependence. And as the costs of healthcare, pensions, and public salaries kept rising, the government ran out of easy options. So when President Macron finally tried to act, the backlash was explosive. When Emmanuel Macron announced a plan to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, France erupted. Millions of people flooded the streets. Trains stopped, schools closed, and garbage piled high across Paris. For weeks, the country looked less like a modern democracy and more like a nation in revolt. To the rest of the world, the reform sounded minor. Germany and Italy already retire at 67, and in the United States, it is 66. But in France, pensions are not just policy, they are identity. Generations grew up believing the state would always provide. Touching that promise felt like betrayal. Macron's argument was simple. Without reform, the pension system would collapse under its own weight. Economists agreed, yet 70% of the French population stood against him. Parliament refused to pass the bill, so Macron forced it through using a constitutional loophole. Legally, it worked. Politically, it was a disaster. His approval ratings crashed to historic lows. The government barely survived a no-confidence vote, and Macron's party lost its majority. Every proposal since then has been met with division and paralysis. France's leaders know change is necessary, but the public sees every reform as an attack on their way of life. The result is a political stalemate. Reforms cannot pass, protests never end, and the debt keeps growing. Investors are beginning to notice that the problem is no longer political theater, it is structural. And when investors start to lose faith, the damage spreads much faster than any protest can. For decades, France was one of Europe's safest bets. Investors saw it as stable, reliable, and far removed from the chaos of smaller economies. Lending money to France once felt as secure as lending to Germany. But not anymore. As debt kept rising and political paralysis deepened, confidence began to fade. Credit rating agencies downgraded France to its lowest score in modern history. For the first time ever, it now costs France just as much to borrow money as it costs Italy, a country long seen as more fragile and risky. That shift is enormous. It means the markets no longer believe France can fix its finances easily, and when that belief cracks, the whole system shakes. Higher borrowing costs make the debt grow faster. Investors demand even higher returns to take on that risk. The loop tightens and the exit disappears. The warning signs are eerily familiar. Back in 2010, Greece's 10-year bond yields were around 3.3% before its crisis exploded. Today, France's bonds are sitting almost at the same level. Back then, it took only one spark, a loss of confidence and a wave of selling, to push Greece into financial collapse. If the same loss of faith hits France, the consequences would be far worse. This is not a small country that can quietly be rescued. This is the backbone of the Eurozone, the second largest economy in Europe. And once the backbone bends, the rest of the structure begins to tremble. Investors see it, economists warn about it, and yet no one seems able to change course. The spiral has started, and the next step could determine not only France's future, but Europe's. Because when France begins to fall, the shock never stops at its borders. France is not just another European nation, it makes up nearly 1/5 of the entire Eurozone economy. If France were to stumble, the impact would shake the continent. And the worst part is that Europe may not even have the tools to save it. The euro was built on a promise. Each member country would keep its finances under control so the single currency could remain stable. To enforce that, strict rules were created. Deficits must stay below 3% of GDP, and debt must remain under 60%. But France has broken both rules for years, running double the allowed deficit and piling debt well beyond the limit. If France ever reached the point where it could no longer pay its bills, the European Central Bank would have to intervene, buying French bonds to stop the panic. But that would open a door no one in Europe wants to walk through. Because if France gets rescued, every other struggling country will expect the same. At that point, discipline disappears, and the euro's credibility begins to collapse. This is why analysts call France too big to fail. The country is massive enough to drag the entire Eurozone down with it, yet also too large for anyone to bail out. A rescue of that scale could trigger political chaos in Germany, the Netherlands, and other northern nations already frustrated with carrying their neighbors. There is no playbook for this. Europe managed to bail out Greece, Portugal, and Ireland, but those economies were tiny in comparison. France is 10 times larger than Greece. If confidence breaks, no amount of negotiation or patchwork policy can contain the fallout. The truth is that France's crisis is not just about money, it is about trust. Once investors and citizens stop believing the government can deliver stability, the spiral becomes unstoppable. And if that happens, Europe will face a choice it has never faced before. Either save France and risk breaking the rules that hold the Union together, or let one of its founding pillars fall. France stands at a crossroads that feels almost impossible to escape. The country that once symbolized stability, elegance, and progress now carries a burden too heavy for its economy to bear. The numbers tell one story, but the people tell another. A nation built on the promise of protection now finds that promise turning against it. Every generation since the war has lived under the belief that the state would always step in to heal, to educate, to provide. But that model was built in an era of youth, growth, and optimism. The France of today is older, slower, and deeply divided. The cost of that protection is now measured in trillions, and the bill keeps growing every second. Politicians call for reform, yet each attempt sparks outrage. Economists call for restraint, yet every solution feels like betrayal. Investors call for discipline, yet no one wants to face the pain that comes with it. France has become trapped between its ideals and its reality. And as its debt rises and confidence fades, Europe watches closely. Because if the second largest economy in the Eurozone begins to falter, the shock will not stop at the French border. It will test the unity of the entire European project. France is too big to fail, but too fragile to fix easily. The calm of the past has given way to a storm that no one seems ready to face. The warning signs are flashing, the countdown has begun, and the question now is not if France can survive this moment, but how long Europe can afford to ignore it.